Hey, everybody. I'm Laura Sokola, and I'm here with Dr. Jenny Byrne. We are super excited to have you joining us on LinkedIn Live, on YouTube Live. And for whatever reason, my camera seems to keep on falling in different directions. So please keep adjusting it. Now, you know, this is truly live, not pre-recorded, not pre-sanitized or anything. Just here for a real conversation with real people about real issues and real tech challenges. You know, welcome to the digital world. Dr. Jenny, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, Dr. Laura, great to be with you again.
This is a topic that Dr. Jenny and I have talked about a number of times in a variety of different contexts, from my podcast, Speaking to Influence, to Chief webinars. We're bringing it to you guys here today because, frankly, it's something that we all struggle with. And it's typically referred to as burnout. That's a sort of a catch phrase. But we want to dig in a little bit deeper. And we're going to give it a moment or so just as people are joining in, as people are popping out of their last meetings, perhaps grabbing lunch. If you're here on the East Coast, grab your water, grab your coffee, whatever you need. But please start by just sharing with us in the chat, who are you? Where are you? We would love to have you share a little bit about yourself, about what brings you here today, what your industry is or what your role is, whatever you'd like to share. It just helps us to get a picture for what the objectives are and who's joining us today. And of course, we'll be sharing some items along the way. So let me share with everybody out there a little bit of visual. Then this, I think, will help us to promote or to keep everybody on track with what we're really going to be focusing on today. So number one, let's see, here we go. Again, participation by all means. Everybody join us in the conversation. We want this to be organic. We want this to be interactive. We don't want it to be just us talking, although we're happy to have a chat together. But we really do want to hear from you. So please share whatever is on your heart, whatever's on your mind. Any questions, any, oh my gosh, that's like this, any advice that you're looking for, any suggestions. And we just really want this to be a great conversation. So with that, my other invitation to all of you is that I'm going to just front load this instead of making you wait till the end. If you would like a simple summary sheet of all the major tips that we're going to share today, you can take your phone right now, open up to your camera, and just scan this QR code. And this will give you the opportunity to download one sheet with everything we're going to share, both the conceptual and the tactical. So if you're somebody who has a little bit of challenge, sometimes going from okay, I understand what that means, but how do I have the conversation with somebody? Or I'm good at talking to people, I just don't really know what to say or how to explain it. We're going to share all of that with you today. If you can stick around for the full conversation, great. If you're somebody who may have to bounce a few minutes early because of other meetings or other obligations, go ahead right now, take out your phone, scan this QR code. And of course, we will bring this screen up again at the end, so you will have another chance to do so. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, wait, where's my phone? I don't have a chance. I joined too late. You can join us afterward, or not afterwards, excuse me, but at the very end, again, you'll have the chance to download this. Let's see, we've got people joining from coast to coast, sea to shining sea, from Sacramento, California, and biopharma to Philadelphia. So there's a great range of people joining us today. So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, good evening if there's anybody joining us from overseas. And let's get on with the show, shall we?
Let's do it.
All right. So let's see. Dr. Jenny, where are you? And we're going to, we're going to do a quick overview. Dr. Jenny, we'll get to who we are, but why don't you share real quick why we're talking about this?
So hopefully the reason you're here, the why behind why we're here today is we want to talk about burnout and moral injury. So why does it matter? So we've noticed, and you probably have noticed, that burnout is really a buzzword today in the workplace. It is recorded at record highs for physicians. So I'm a physician by training, so I focus on physicians and healthcare quite a bit, but also in other industries. And more importantly, despite it being a buzzword and despite a lot of attention, the solutions don't seem to be helping.
So that's why we're here today. Go for it.
So what we wanted to bring to you today was a quick overview of burnout and moral injury, how the two differ, And Dr. Laura, in particular, wants to share with you how you can communicate about these topics with your teams. And also, sometimes more importantly, how can you communicate up to the C-suite or even your board about these issues, which are kind of difficult to talk about?
Right, right. So we'll be looking at the managing up, managing down, managing sideways, and anywhere else. This really, I think you'll agree, Dr. Jenny, this is just a topic that even when people want to talk about it, they don't
Yeah.
know how or they're afraid. So we want to make sure that we're greasing those skids as much as possible, empowering you with the knowledge to share and the manner in which you can share it to make it super easy. Go ahead, Dr. Jenny, take it away. Give us a little bit about your background first so people understand why we are talking about this, meaning why we are talking about this.
Yeah, so I think it's always great just so that you get to know who we are. So, professionally speaking, I'm a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist by training. So, I say I'm a brain and behavior expert. I'm also an author, put out my first book earlier this year. I work as an entrepreneur, a healthcare executive. I'm a whole person. I have other hobbies and family issues as well. My fun fact is always that I'm playing in a rock band right now on electric bass. So, that's my fun
Awesome.
fact.
I love it. Okay, now I just really want to detour the entire conversation and have you pull out your bass and give us a couple of bars. What's your favorite riff? What's your favorite song to play?
Oh, we played Super Freak last season, and that was a super fun bass riff to play Super Freak.
That's awesome. I love it. I will never listen to that song again the same way. Now I'm just going to envision you up there. Did
That's
you have
right.
like the punk rock hair going
Oh
back in the
yeah,
day?
big hair, big hair.
Children of the 80s. That's what we did. Not that you could guess it by looking at us now. I know my 17-year-old self would look at me and go, "I'm so disappointed in you. I mean, did I teach you nothing about hairspray and teasing and all that kind of fun stuff?" But we digress. So thank you for sharing that. And just for me, for anybody who hasn't met me yet, I'm Dr. Laura Sokola. I'm also an author and a podcast host, both under the title of Speaking to Influence. So I'm a leadership, communication, and influence coach and trainer. That's really my focus. I'm a cognitive linguist by background. I share with many that I am a recovering academic and accidental entrepreneur. And I think that's important for you to understand out there that while Dr. Jenny is out of the medical space and I am out of the academic space originally, we are both researchers, we are both professionals, but we are also business owners and we do most of our work now in the corporate and other business settings. So we appreciate where you are coming from as well. And with that, give us a little bit of background, Dr. Jenny. What is burnout? Because this is a phrase we hear a lot, but what does it really mean?
Yeah, so people talk about burnout now all the time now, and they may mean different things when they say burnout. But technically, so from the ICD-10, which is more of a clinical manual, burnout is defined as a syndrome that results from chronic workplace stress, feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feeling negative or cynical related to one's job. And then finally, a functional outcome of reduced professional efficacy. In other words, decreased work product.
Okay. I think this is certainly something that everybody can relate to having experienced at some point or other, whether it's now that perpetual exhaustion mentally, emotionally, and otherwise. But then what is moral injury?
So, moral injury is a topic that I've learned quite a bit about in the past year, and I find it really interesting because it's actually different than burnout. So, the idea of moral injury comes to us from work with veterans who
Hmm.
came back from combat situations or deployments, and they really were struggling, and it wasn't just PTSD. And so, researchers were trying to figure out, well, what is this if it's not PTSD? And they came up with the idea of moral injury. And so, the definition of moral injury is when a person either fails to act, or they witness an act that goes against their values. And this can be their own personal values, their family values, their faith-based values, their professional ethical values, but it's an internalized value.
And we can certainly understand where veterans would have experienced this. They literally have to kill people in some situations, which is heart-wrenching and horrifying. And you can imagine where that would just absolutely eat away at them forever coming back. So it's less of the morality, if I'm understanding correctly, like you're an immoral person or you're an amoral person. We're not casting judgment on the morality actively of somebody else, but where you are feeling like this is causing an internal struggle that you can't reconcile for yourself. Am I understanding that correctly?
Exactly. And in the field of healthcare where I work, a common example would be if you feel very rushed to see your patients, you may feel that you're not able to care for them the way that you've been trained or the way that you value. And so that may feel similarly like more what they call moral injury because it goes against your values.
I mean, you join healthcare, I presume, because you want to take care of people, you want to care
Right.
for people. And if you're being put in a situation where you're unable to do what you're called to do, there's probably a guilt in many ways of feeling like you're failing your patients. And God forbid they don't get better or something goes wrong, to feel like it's your fault, except that you were prevented from doing what you could have done otherwise to get the results that, of course, everybody was hoping for. Is that an accurate interpretation?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there are many other examples, but that's one that I think most people can relate to.
It's certainly easy to wrap your head around that one.
Yeah, and then the second part is that the act is condoned or ordered or encouraged by a senior figure. And this is really important when we get to the communication part, but um, it's your boss or the system or the hospital or the C-suite, or they're either telling you to do this thing or condoning it and letting it happen. So that's actually a really important component of moral injury. And then the final part is the stakes are high. So again, in military settings, it's clear, right? Life or death situations. In healthcare, it's pretty clear the stakes are life and death. But in corporate, it's a little different. Some of the interesting things about corporate is it may not actually be life or death, but it may feel like life or death to you. Maybe life or death to your career or your promotion or your reputation. So it's not life and death literally, but it certainly has the same emotional impact sometimes as a life or death situation.
And it could even be a matter of, okay, we have KPIs to reach, we have sales quotas to reach, and I'm being told I have to close this many sales by the end of the month. But in order to do that, I have to do something that I'm
Icky.
not comfortable, right? Something
Yeah.
icky. I think that's a really good technical term. I have to do something icky on a regular basis. That's good. I think that's something that's universal, whether you're in pharmaceuticals or in cybersecurity or in construction. You have to do something icky, and it doesn't make you feel good. Good. Any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's just, again, noticing, we're going to show the differences, but this is actually very different than burnout when you kind of get down to the core parts of it. So
Tell us about that.
so the differences are moral injury. So when you say burnout, it kind of implicitly puts, I don't want to say the blame, but it puts the onus on the individual.
Right.
Like, you should take better care of yourself. You should rest. You should go do yoga. You should whatever. Whereas moral injury really puts the focus and the onus on more of the system around the individual. So it's something more external and persistent. And the individual can't fix moral injury by taking vacations or taking care of themselves. Might help them, but it's not going to fix the underlying problem. And this is why I think the communication is so tough, because it implies this external systematic problem. And that makes it tricky because it's not just one person and how to help them. It's really like the whole system.
Right. Right. So the onus, really, whose responsibility is it for fixing this? It's not just about
Right.
eating better, getting more sleep, something along those lines, which I'm pretty sure would help, but not going to fix it. It'll be a momentary at best.
Yeah, and I think that's, when we think about like why we've been working on burnout solutions for years now, like why aren't they working? My hypothesis is that the burnout solutions aren't working because they're not addressing systemic, parts of the problem. And so that's why everyone's scratching their heads like, well, we've done all these things, but it's not really fixing anything.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't put a Band-Aid on something that's, a neurological problem. It's not going to help.
Right.
Okay. Then from there, how do we fix it? If it's not about take a vacation, eat better, get more sleep, what do we do?
So what I think is really interesting about the fixed moral injury, again, this comes from the literature from veterans work, and how they have found success in reversing the problem, or at least making it better. Um, the things that help actually don't cost a lot of money. They're not some complex organizational, new tech product or fancy thing, or it's actually has more to do with communication and talking to each other and what to say and how to say it. So from the veterans literature, what they found to be helpful was, first of all, identifying the problem.
Mm,
Is it burnout? Is it moral injury? Is it depression? Is it like, what is it? So first of all, being able to talk about it, which isn't as easy as it may sound, but being able to identify it and talk about it and to say, well, what value was transgressed? Was it when I can't take care of my patient, it made me feel like a bad doctor. It made me feel like I was letting down my profession. It made me feel like I was hurting somebody. Or maybe in corporate settings, the icky factor, it made me feel like I was being dishonest, or it made me feel like I was cheating or doing something kind of icky. So that's the first part. And it sounds easy, but actually that may be almost the hardest part, is just to be able to identify it and talk about it.
right. I think
And then,
those are really two different things, being able to identify it, even for
yeah,
yourself. Do you find there's a lot that people really struggle to figure out what is it that I'm wrestling with? I mean, maybe I know that I don't like that I have to do X, but how to articulate the internal problem, or to identify it for yourself and put your finger on it, as opposed to the more holistic, I'm unhappy, I'm tired, and I don't like this situation. And then, of course, being able to find the words and the way to even open to broach the subject in the conversation with whoever else it is from there, that those are almost two separate problems. Am I accurate in that assessment?
I think totally accurate. And to me, again, this is why I think the solutions aren't working, because if you act like, I'm going to give a physician example.
Please.
If you ask a physician, like, okay, what's bothering you? What's wrong? They probably aren't aware that this is happening. They're just like, all I know is that I feel bad. I feel icky. I feel like something's wrong. And then if you ask them, well, what do you want to do to fix it? They'll say, and they'll, whatever comes top of mind, they'll say, I hate this electronic chart. I don't like doing that. Or I hate this office procedure, or I hate this. And so they'll tell you what's bothering them on the surface, but you may fix all those things and they'll still feel bad. So I see this a lot, like companies spend a lot of time and energy doing these surveys and saying, well, what would you like to be different? And then they get these superficial answers, and then they spend all this time and energy fixing these superficial things, and then nothing changes, right? So I think it is hard. And so first of all, the dialogue to help people understand what moral injury is, what burnout is, that lets you start to identify it. But again, even if you it, sometimes it's hard to identify your own emotions. And this, as a therapist, right, I saw this all the time, and I personally have experienced it. Sometimes it's hard, and you need your team or your boss or someone to help you almost navigate what you're feeling and help you give voice to what is going on for you.
Absolutely. I find that a general rule of thumb is that non-experts in whatever the area is don't know how to identify and articulate the issue. I mean, I've had conversations with leaders who have called me to work with someone on their team, and the conversation will go something like, so tell me, how can I help? Well, I want you to help this person communicate better. Okay, could you give me a little more specific detail in how does he need to communicate better? Well, he's just really not a good communicator. Thank you. Very helpful on that one. And it's like they can't put their finger on it. They just know it's either they don't get it when he talks, or it's not inspiring, or it just doesn't, something's bothering them, but they don't know how to put their finger on it. So I think that's a lot of what we're trying to do today, is to help people put their finger on it, right?
Yeah. And not to feel bad about it. I mean, I can't shrink myself, right? Like, I struggle with the same things, even though I do this for a living. So really having a team or a boss or an external person sometimes is really important to be able to do this.
most of us can't see the forest for the trees in some way, shape, or form. When
Right.
you're too in it, you're too close to it, you lose your perspective. And we all need that sounding board, that whole notion of the cobbler's kids having no shoes. I need people to help me with branding and whatever else, even though I'm the communications person for everybody else. Very hard to do for myself. It is just the nature
Exactly.
of the beast, right?
Yep.
Okay, so then should we shift a little bit into some of the tacticals?
Wait, let's go back 1 minute. I think I missed. Yeah, let me
Please.
go to the other 2 points I think I skipped over. But the other 2 points about, again, coming from the military, how they helped this problem.
Yep.
So the senior leaders, so again, in healthcare, this would be the senior clinical leaders, giving them a voice to take what is happening in their team up, managing it up to whatever the C-suite, the board, helping them translate that is extremely important part of the fix. And also acknowledging that the stakes are high. So validating the feeling, again, even in corporate, if it's not life or death, like validating, yes, I get it. If you don't meet your KPIs, I see where that would be really alarming to you, and how that might stress you out. So that's the other part.
These are all pieces that if we don't have them in the back of our minds, they're not going to come out of the front of our mouths accurately and effectively, I think. So for everybody to bear these things in mind and give yourself permission to recognize that it's hard to address a lot of these things. It's not supposed to be easy. And that's not that that's okay, but it's okay that we're each wrestling with how to approach it. And of course, that's why we're here today, is to help to grease those skids and alleviate that burden a little bit. Anything else, Dr. Jenny?
No, I say let's get to the good stuff and the tactics and the how, because people are always like, oh, that's all really great, but tell me how to do it. So let's get into some of the detail.
Well, as a qualifier, I think this stuff has been really good so far. So I would hardly say that we're going to draw the line and now get to the good stuff by any stretch, because
the practical. Let's get to the practical stuff.
There we go. I like to say that the biggest gap in the world is the 3 inches between here and here, where we know conceptually what we need to do, but then we open our mouths and either nothing comes out or something really unrecognizable or ineffective does. So let's close that gap a little bit. We'll start with communicating with your teams. So either the lateral or the managing down, working with your direct or even indirect reports, that your greater teams at that point. I think we're going to go right back to what you just mentioned, which is the idea of validating the topic, normalizing the topic. In human resources, we've had a lot more opening in the last years about talking about diversity, about talking about people who were neurodivergent, people who have this difference or that difference, and then it's okay. It's not, we need to remove the stigma from this topic. So allowing the term of moral injury to be a topic, just like burnout is a topic that is acceptable and desirable to discuss, to the extent that it's not a desirable happenstance, but if it's happening, that we want to open those conversations. That's important. And to let people know that, look, it's not you, it's the system, and to figure out how to address what those points are. And of course, just when you are broaching the subject with the people who are under you at that point, to address with empathy, to give people permission to explicitly state, if you are feeling something along these lines, or you think you might be, it's okay to talk. We want to hear what you're struggling with. This is a safe space. People need you to articulate these kinds of things explicitly so that they know that it's okay to talk to you about it, that you're not going to get defensive, that you want to hear what their challenges are, that they're not going to get blamed for the whole blame the victim kind of thing. They're not going to get blamed for whatever it is that they're experiencing, that you're open to that discussion.
And I would add one thing here,
Please.
Dr. Lara. When I was writing my book, I talked about this idea of empathy fatigue.
What's the title of your book, by the way?
It's called Work Smart. It's there behind me. Work Smart, Use Your Brain and Behavior to Master the Future of Work.
Love it.
And I have a whole section on empathy, because I really believe that this is one of our biggest struggles at work. So I just wanted to add, when you talk about empathy, that people have been very surprised to hear that empathy fatigue is real. So if you are going to communicate with your team, your own ability to empathize, like, be kind to yourself and know that you have limits. So if you're having a bad day and you're stressed out and whatever is going on, that may not be the best time to try to be empathetic with your team. So just be kind to yourself and know that you have your own limits of empathy, and that's okay and totally normal.
And if it is a day where you're just like, I'm up to here, I got some bad news today, I've had to deal with this and whatever else, and I just don't have the bandwidth for one more person bringing problems to me today, what's a good way to redirect that?
I think, well, first of all, I wouldn't open a new conversation around something like moral injury on a day where it's not happening. And then also to model that kind of vulnerability can be very powerful, and to tell your team, look, I got some stuff going on in the background. It's not impairing my work, but I have to tell you, if I seem a little off today, just want to let you know I got some stuff going on in the background.
Sure.
If you can find a way to be a little vulnerable as a leader, sometimes people will give you more grace than you think.
And I'm guessing also that if somebody then does at a future date bring up, the desire to have a conversation about moral injury or potential moral injury they want to discuss with you on a day when you're feeling that, to be open and say, I absolutely want to hear this. Is it an absolute emergency to do at the moment? Is there something occurring, or can we talk about it tomorrow? Because I want to be able to give you the attention that you deserve, and I don't feel like I can focus today.
And if it is urgent, maybe get out, say, you know what, I'd like to take a walk while we talk. Could I just put my headphones on and we can do a little walk and talk together? Or, go meditate, sit outside, do something, give yourself a little space. Maybe that'll be enough for you to come back, depending on what you got going on.
Sure. Schedule the time so that they know you have the intention of having the conversation. It just doesn't need to be right now because you stuck your head in my door and say, hey, do you have a minute? No, I don't. So, but I do want to give you one. So let's find a good place that's mutually beneficial for both of us. Yep. As we got some comments also of recognizing the value of this, and coaching leaders on empathy and how to support teams as doing
huge.
that. Really powerful. It's easy to get drained on that when you feel like everybody's coming to you.
Yes.
And sometimes you just get to, even the most extroverted and most empathetic of us do have our human limits, much as we don't like to acknowledge them sometimes.
Yes.
Okay, then let's look at going upward, because to the extent that you're not at the top of the food chain and you may or may not have the ability to adjust to the system and whatever the challenge is, we got to bring it up to the powers that be. And this is really scary, which of course also for your people to be bringing it up to you is scary, and in much of the same way. So a few of the things that will help to make sure that the adrenaline level, the DEFCON levels and whatnot stay at a much more neutral space to facilitate that discussion. Again, beginning with empathy and diplomacy, and just remembering that this is, at least the very first conversation for sure, is not about a blame game. We're not saying you've morally injured me. I think the term, and tell me if you find that this is Dr. Jenny, but the label, and this is not a label that either one of us came up with, it's just what somebody else gave it, is that burnout is something that's kind of an emotionally neutral. It's something that's happened to me. Moral injury seems to have a charge to it as a label. It's almost like I'm being morally injured. You're injuring me. You're an immoral person who's there's a lot of that fear in bringing it up that we need to find a way, and we'll get to some tactics in a moment about how to reduce that and make sure somebody's not hearing right off the bat that you're accusing them of injuring you morally, that it's not a your fault kind of a thing. So that's first and foremost.
And I was gonna, I'll just add, the reason I don't love the burnout word is a little different, because it makes me think of a light bulb that you change when it burns out, and that makes me feel like a cog in a machine, and I don't like that, right?
Sure.
But moral injury, you almost get like a knife, coming at you with a knife. But the word is serious because it is a serious issue. But you're right, I think it's a provocative term.
And just one that can make whoever is on the receiving end of the conversation go immediately defensive. And when someone's defensive, the wall goes up and they can't hear what you're actually asking for them, especially in a corporate space or any sort of professional space. There's the immediate siren that goes off as far as, is this going to send me to HR? Are they going to make a complaint against me? Is this going to be a black mark in my... Okay, so we need to bring down that anxiety and that fear space, bring down that barrier so that the conversation can move forward.
Exactly.
So I think an important way to start is by in executing diplomacy and empathy is to first say, look, here's what I recognize the efforts have been to date, the opportunities. I took the vacation. I, appreciate the flex time. I've been doing these kinds of things, but showing why it's not working, why their intention was good, but it's not having the desired effects. And then even more beyond the personal, where appropriate, in turn, talking to the senior leadership who are the decision makers, to be able to say that your bigger concern, and I'm going to tie these next two bullets together, is that there are bigger business-wide, organization-wide effects, higher turnover. The discussion, the scuttlebutt around the office there's a lot of buzz about people needing to look elsewhere, or there's just too much complaint about, can't handle it anymore. It's overwhelming. So what to listen for? Think about it. What are the terms you're hearing, and what are the possible effects on the brand, on the turnover, on those kinds of things? And then, of course, when you do initiate those conversations, we don't just want a data dump. Nobody wants somebody to vent to you about all the problems and then want you to solve them. If you are identifying problems, at least bring up some opportunities for solutions, some suggestions or recommendations, which they may accept, shoot down, or modify, depending on where the conversation goes, but at least to show that you've put some thought into this and aren't expecting them to save you and to fix the problem single-handedly with no suggestions or input. Any suggestions on that, Dr. Jenny?
Yeah, I think exactly, like using empathy with the C-suite. What's on their mind? What's it like for them? If you just come and vent and it's going to sound like complaining. They go on the defense, but if you frame it in terms of, here's what I've observed, and I think bringing facts and figures always helps, right? This is our retention rate problem. This is our increased cost due to temporary staffing, blah, 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 blah. And then you give them solutions. So I've, done some research. I've talked to so-and-so, and here, I've talked to the teams, and here are some solutions I think we could consider. And, maybe a little bit about here are the economics of them. And by the way, this solution actually doesn't really cost any money. It's more about like, how do we talk about it? And I think that shows that you have empathy with the C-suite, because you understand where they're coming from, what's important to them. You validate the good work they've already done. So again, it's really comes back to empathy and framing things in a way that you can have a productive conversation.
Yeah. And I think even on a broader picture, for when you think about your own careers and moving up, what often is C-suite leaders are looking for in identifying who's ready for something else is where there has been evidence of conversation that shows that you know how to think on that massive strategic level. So if you're saying, I have suggestions for how to help the organization, I understand the impact this has in our finances, on our revenue, on our whatever else it is, that's a good little point that they're going to hold in the back of their mind. Yeah?
Great point. Yep.
So it'll benefit you in other ways as well in the long and possibly short term. Okay, so let's get into those super nitty-gritty tactical. How do we frame it? We got the concepts up here. What are some phrases that can come out of our mouths? Feel free to take a screenshot of these. Feel free to use your camera or something, or just jot down the notes. So some phrases that can help to open the door might be things like, I thought I was just feeling burnout. Again, using the terminology that everybody recognizes, but here's what's not working. Here's where I don't feel things are changing, et cetera. Recognizing, and this is how empathy shows up in conversation, not sympathy, not whatever else, but to explicitly give the benefit of the doubt of positive intent. I cannot emphasize enough how important this is. And so letting people know, I know you'd never intentionally do this, or I know that you're under pressure for this, or that the system was created with the intent of helping people do X, or because we're under this giant, budget crunch or time crunch or whatever it is. And the reason this is important is because, when you look at that coin between intent and impact, I know that a lot of the rhetoric is around, it doesn't matter what your intent is. You need to acknowledge the impact that you've had on somebody else. Yes, that is what should happen. But the fact is, most people, when the defenses kick in, where the blood goes and what part of the brain kicks in first, and whether it's reptile brain versus something else, when the emotion part of the brain kicks in first because that's the reflex. People can't hear objectively what the nature of the problem is. The fight or flight overrides everything else. So if they're afraid that you're thinking that they're a bad person for doing it, they're going to go into deny and defend mode and not be able to help with the real manifestation of the problem. So just giving, and I want this to be clear, and Dr. Jenny, feel free to jump in here. We're not saying blame the victim or, the victim has to give the villain term. We're not using those labels. It's just a matter of to get what you need, kind of that Jerry Maguire help me help you thing. We need to let them know that we're not blaming them personally, most likely, and that may be an issue, but that's a next stage conversation perhaps, that you're giving the benefit of the doubt. Then they can bring down the wall and barrier, and then they can hear what you need them to hear. So it's just kind of a prefacing step to facilitate the conversation that you'll need. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, tons of neuroscience evidence that if you frame the conversation in a negative light immediately, people shut down and literally don't see what you're saying. So tons of good neuroscience behind that.
Thank you for that. And if you have any recommendations of places people can go to find that, those evidence,
happy to geek out on neuroscience anytime. Just DM me, everybody.
Well, good. You can geek out on me with that afterward. So any sort of resources, and maybe we can post a couple of links in the chat after this after this is archived. Once it's up for everybody else, we'll put it in the comments on LinkedIn or in YouTube. And there's a great framework that I really like, and a number of people have used it in different varieties, but it's called learning to sew, SEW. And the purpose of it is to approach the conversation with inarguable facts. So non-subjective, it's subjective insofar as how you experience it, but I can't argue what you experience. So the S in sew is the statement of a stimulus or a sensation. So the fact is, when you do X, when I have to do Y, when there are this many people in this amount of time, there are this many patients on my roster, there are this many, my KPIs to reach this by this deadline. Those are all inarguable facts. That's the statement of the problem. It makes me feel. That's your effect or the emotion that is. It's what you feel. It's your subjective interpretation, but it's an inarguable fact. The fact is, that's how it influences you. That's how it lands on you. You're sharing that piece as the result. And then the W is what you want or what you would like, what you need, frankly, as a result. So I want or I need, I would like this to change in this way. Here's the solution I suggest in whatever level of depth. But when you can use that sequence of statement, they may or may not like what you're saying, but they can't argue it. They can't deny certain things. They can't argue the logic or the wordsmithing or the framing of something. It just is what it is. And that opens the door. Thoughts on that, Jenny?
Yeah, I love this. I use something that's similar called Staben, and maybe we'll just put a link. I have a YouTube video I did, 10 years ago, and it's like 400,000 people. So that framework really works. I use it myself a lot.
Sure.
And these conversations sometimes take like literally 30 seconds.
Yeah.
You practice it in your mind and then you execute it. And it's kind of amazing when you do it. So yeah, we can put that link in there too.
That's great. And it takes the charge out of the conversation, out of the statements, and allows the other person to share. And this is just as useful in personal conversations. My husband and I both know the SO framework. And when we need to have a conversation, we say, I want to sew here with you. Okay. Let me hear it.
That's nice. I like that.
Yes. We're going to sew together tonight. We'll bring out our knitting needles and create something constructive and hopefully beautiful as a result. So finally, a couple more frames in here. Another great framework. Many of you have probably read the book Crucial Conversations by Granny Patterson et al. And one of their structures that they refer to is contrasting statements. The very simple equation is not X, but Y. So it's where you're trying to preempt, you're kind of predicting where they may go down a negative path here. They may get defensive. They may misinterpret you some way. So you're going to nip that in the bud and prevent them from going in that direction. Or if it seems like they've already gone in that direction, you want to reel them back. You want to correct the misunderstanding. So it's things like, please don't misunderstand. I'm not blaming you for this. I'm not accusing anyone. I don't want you to think that
Mhm.
I'm unhappy with whatever it happens to be. Um, but this, or you could take the word but out if you don't like the word but, because they're bracing themselves for the but anyway. You could use the word just instead. I just need you to understand the impact that this is having. I just need help trying to do this better. So what do you need? Not X, but Y. And in doing so, whether you're using so or you're using your contrasting statements, we've talked a lot about what the words are. We need to also look at how those words are delivered, what's called your paralinguistic cues or your nonverbal cues, your vocal cues. So your facial expressions, your voice, your body language. There's a big difference between saying, please don't misunderstand. I'm really not trying to make any accusations versus, okay, look, don't misunderstand. I'm not trying to make any accusations. The eye roll and the exasperation in the voice. You're already the frustration, the exasperation, the disdain is just oozing from that. So, okay, you may be claiming that you're not trying to pick a fight,
Right.
but it's hard to believe by the energy that's coming with that. So just take that deep breath. And I really recommend the video camera. Anybody who's done coaching with me, anybody who's done training with me knows that nobody escapes the video camera. If you're going to work with me, just dry run it, open your camera and put it up, and on your phone or Zoom or whatever you want, do a solo video run and just first 30 seconds. How are you going to use that contrasting statement? How are you going to practice SEW? What would that sound like? Watch it, record it, and then watch it and see if you go, yeah, that's how I want it to come across versus, ooh, perhaps I should take the sarcasm out of my voice as I do that. Or using that phrase may not have set the conversation off in the right direction. You need to see what you actually did, regardless of what you intended to do. Often there's a massive gap, and that gap will absolutely tank the conversation before it even starts. So do at least one dry run on the video first. That's the best strategy and tip that I can give you. Thoughts on that, Dr. Jenny?
Yeah, I think I also use words. Again, this is very empathy based. Like you're
Yes.
showing empathy by saying these things. I might say things like, well, I imagine you're thinking I'm here to complain, or I
Yes.
imagine I use that one a lot,
Yep.
or I'm curious if you are thinking X, Y, and Z, but here's what I mean. So it's kind of that same idea of contrasting statements, but
Right.
I like to use those a lot. Like, kind of that curious, like, I'm curious. Do are you
Right.
thinking this? But it's just empathy. It shows that you understand where they're coming from. You're trying to empathize with them.
Yep.
And that can make a big difference.
Absolutely. All great framings. So that leaves us with plenty of time in the next few minutes for questions and answers. If there's anything that we have not addressed that you would like us to address, by all means, please put it in the chat. I'm more than happy to relay that for everybody else. We can address that. And of course, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a simple QR. Pull out your phone right now, scan the QR, and it'll give you all these points that were in our slides, everything we've discussed, and a nice, simple one-page summary sheet that you can reference anytime. Super tactical, super easy to help you open those conversations up, down, or sideways for that point. Dr. Jenny, any final thoughts?
No, I'm just so happy we're having the conversation. I'm been writing about moral injury. I'm putting out a LinkedIn article every week for the next couple months, and hopefully the fact sheet will be helpful to you all. Dr. Laura and I are here for questions. We love getting questions in LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to reach us. So just, happy to send me a message or both of us a message together.
Absolutely. And so with that, we will invite you to connect with us. If you are not already connected or following us on LinkedIn, you can we've got the URLs right there. So feel free to type those on in. And of course, our websites as well, where you can go for more information. And the QRs are there too. So if you've got your phone handy, pull that out, do a scan of each of us and connect with us on LinkedIn. We would love to hear back from you. We'd love any questions that you've got, any suggestions or whatever feedback, what resonated with you, what made you particularly curious, what was your aha moment, that kind of stuff is always valuable for me and for you too, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And just good luck, everybody. We have a lot of empathy for you and
Yes.
what you're going through. That's one of the reasons we brought this to you today.
Absolutely. So, with that, thank you all for joining us today. It's been great talking to you. We look forward to continuing the conversation on our next LinkedIn Live.
Bye.